Hello, welcome to CraftQuest on Call. I'm Ryan Ireland. I'm one of your hosts of this live stream that we do on the first and third Thursday of every month. Coming to you live from Austin, Texas, where the thunderstorms have passed through, leaving us with a glorious, glorious rainfall, much needed in July. We have a fun episode for today. I have a special guest. While Andrew, my usual sidekick and partner in crime, is out traveling the world and taking some time off, I have invited a community member and friend, Lindsey DiLoreto, who's a plugin developer. Probably use his Google Maps plugin. Also developed plugins from, I'm going to say it wrong, Double Secret. Oh, Lindsey. See, I can't even remember now. All right, let me introduce Lindsey. Hello, Lindsey. How you doing, man? Oh, music. Oh, no, I think Lindsey froze.
Oh, no, I froze.
You froze.
I can see me.
Are you okay? You're not moving for me. All right, Lindsey, tell
my little thumbnail. My big one is frozen. But hi. Yeah,
Hi.
Double Secret Agency was the word you were looking
Double
for.
Secret Agency. Thank you.
Double
and
Secret
I'll have a link with the live stream.
Okay.
It's where Lindsey does
no worries.
Software development, and you're back moving again, and the plugin development as well. So Lindsey has put together a really interesting live stream on the history of Craft CMS, and this isn't like gonna be some boring reading from Wikipedia thing that a lot of podcasts do. This is actually going to be stepping through, kind of going back to memory lane and stepping through old versions of Craft that Lindsey has. Some of them he has running on his computer. And just, I got a preview of this yesterday, looking like how the UI has changed, how just our perceptions of what, Craft looks like now versus then. Even down to like the Chrome or the UI elements like native to the browser, just even how those things have changed as well. So we're glad to have you here. Thanks for doing the work to put this whole thing together. I appreciate that.
Yeah, thanks, Ryan. Thanks for having me on. I really appreciate it. I hope it is not as laggy as it seems to be.
It is a little laggy.
It was like literally crystal clear up until 30 seconds ago.
Yeah.
But yeah.
Are you on
we'll work with what we got. So
yeah. Are you on a Wi-Fi connection? Sorry. Oh. I think he lost Lindsey again. All right. While Lindsey is figuring out his internet, I'm going to actually have him call back in. Let me pull myself up. Let's talk a little bit of housekeeping while we're trying to get Lindsey back. And the first thing is I've been seeing a lot of people opt for the CraftQuest Teams plan, which I think is awesome because it's one of my favorite features of CraftQuest. It allows for a company, let's say like an agency with a staff of developers, to have a single account, a single payment form that can be perhaps charged against like some sort of annual education budget. And you can then add and remove people to your allocated seats as needed. You have essentially your own CraftQuest account that you can take with you after the fact. Let's say you leave employment or you don't need it temporarily. All of your stats are saved to your own individual account. So check that out. If you go to craftquest.io/teams, you can check out the Teams plans. Those have been really, really popular recently. All right, let me add Lindsey back in here. Lindsey, let me find my cursor. Oh. Anyway, there he is. Let's see if we can get Lindsey back in here. Lindsey, are you there?
I hope so.
Yeah. All right.
How does it look?
It looks better. Yeah.
Okay, good. I'm afraid to move. I don't want to move.
All good. I was just doing some housekeeping, a little bit of advertising the CraftQuest team plans. So
Perfect.
yeah, it's all good.
Okay, cool.
All right.
Um, well, I'm glad I missed it.
Okay.
No, thanks for having me. It's a genuine pleasure. The talk that I'm going to give today was something that I pitched for .all for this year, which isn't happening, obviously.
Mm-hmm.
So Ryan, is a lot of you know, put out a little call, said, "Hey, if you're interested," and so I sent him my pitch, and he's like, "Hey, let's do it."
Yeah.
Uh, Yesterday, I was giving him a little sneak preview, and it is genuinely exciting. It's very interesting to see. The title is A Brief History of Craft. I'll start it up in a second here. And it's very interesting to see how much and in what ways craft has evolved uh, since the beginning. In fact, let me just jump right in because,
Yeah.
what are we waiting for?
Yeah. Whoop. Or hang on. Let me assign your.
Oh, I should also share
Did you
my
share
screen
your
because I
desk?
don't think
Yeah.
I
Share
just,
your screen because they're now
yeah,
seeing
share my
a.
screen.
They're seeing
Uh,
what is that? That's my laptop camera. Huh.
oh, yeah,
There's
okay.
a view of my office no one
Share
ever
screen.
sees.
Nice. We found it. Okay.
All right.
Now you're seeing my screen?
Yeah. Let me see if it's showing now. Yeah. Okay. Yeah. Go ahead and go into.
Boom. Boom.
Awesome. All right.
Did we get it? We're there?
We're there. All right, Lindsey, you're driving this, and I'm gonna ooh and ah, and also drop in some commentary as we go.
Yeah, please do. I appreciate the Statler and Waldorf comments. We've come so far in craft that if something catches your attention, feel free to shout it out. Like maybe
Yeah,
it's something I noted and maybe it's something I didn't. There's
and
so
I'm
many subtle details along the way that
and I'm monitoring the chat as well. The YouTube chat.
cool.
That's the best way to get a hold of us. If you're a CraftQuest Premium subscriber and you've already gotten access to the private Discord for CraftQuest, you can drop a question or comment in there under the on the air channel. Drop something in there as well. And if you're a premium subscriber but you're not in Discord, go to craftquest.io/community and you'll have your Discord invitation unlocked. All right, Lindsey, let's do this.
Love it. Okay. A brief history of Craft CMS begins on June 4th, 2013, when
Wow.
Craft One was officially born. Craft One was released from beta on that day. Craft 0.9, first it was a private beta and then a public beta, had been available since November 13th, 2012. So from November 13th, 2012 to June 20th, it's like 7.5 months. So we had about 7.5 months of private and public beta before Craft One was born. And if you were to install Craft One and you had all your connections set up and all you had was a blank database and you went to set it up, this is the screen you'd be seeing.
Hmm.
This red craft, begin, and then it walks you through, hey, what's your username and password and the basics. Craft 2 was released on April 1st, 2014. And that was the first time we ever saw the matrix field. And they totally
Wow.
changed the pricing structure, which I will actually, I'm going to come back to the pricing structure thing. I want to give you guys a heads up that I will do a lot of back and forth in these slides. So brace for impact. Um, right here we have June of 2013 to April of 2014 was just shy of a year. Was that like 10 months
Yeah.
ish? I'm ballparking. So pretty good. Now this is Craft 2.0, and it's worth noting that Craft 2.5, while technically a minor point release, was very significant in the world of craft.
Yeah.
And so the other caveat of this presentation is that 2.5 is treated as its own version. So we have, as I walk through this whole thing, we have Craft 1, Craft 2.0, 2.5, 3, 4, and 5.
Yep. I feel like that also
Uh,
happened in Craft 3 where there were some point releases like a 3.5 or something or 3.6 that was fairly significant.
there were many in Craft 3. There were many point releases from probably around 3.1 or 2 all the way up to like 3.5 or 6. there were some really significant things that took shape and kind of crystallized. And by the time you hit 3.6 or 3.7, you're talking about drafts and revisions. You're talking about project config.
Mm-hmm.
These things they went from barely existing when Craft 3 came out in April 2018 to really being crystallized by May of 2022. By the time Craft 4 came out, it was really just a sharpening and honing of everything that Craft 3 had unleashed over the course of its time. Now, Craft 3, April 2018 to May of 2022, that's 4 years. That's a healthy amount of time. And like you
Yeah.
just said, some very significant point releases along the way that Craft 4 just put a button on everything that Craft 3 did.
And I think you see that in I know you'll show like the UI and stuff with the control panel, but you see that between Craft 3 and Craft 4 where there are some changes, but you feel like it started to get like locked into how this like is really going to look.
Yeah. By the time Craft 4 came around, in fact, like you just said, the transition from 3 to 4, you really got the sense that Pixel and Tonic was happy with most of the choices they'd made.
Mm-hmm.
They were like, this is where we want to be. And in fact, to that point, Craft 5 is just an extension of Craft 4. Look, they even have the same install screen, right? Like the font changed or something. It's like a super subtle, the arrow changed, but that's it. That's it. They're happy with their choices, right? Craft 5 brought cool things like the collapsible sidebar navigation and enterification of matrix blocks. All right, we'll talk about that.
Yeah.
I think a healthy, good place to start is the login screen because, that's where you start. In Craft 1, it was very straightforward. It literally just had one job to do. Username, password, keep me logged in. There's the forgot password link. Straight up. You couldn't change the Craft logo without like hacking it, right? So like CPCSS, okay, that's where that kind of came into play.
And this was also Craft 1 was pre-Composer too.
Pre-Composer.
Yeah.
Yep. Composer came around in Craft 3, which was a kind of a revolutionary shift in the Craft universe. Was Craft 3 largely because of Composer. Craft 2.0, you can see they kept basically the same look. It's a non-editable logo, but hey, there's a new background color. It's like a light gray, right? So here's one, like a white, and then it goes to like okay. Obviously they weren't going to rest there. So when 2.5 came around, and 2.5 again is its own major version within itself. Brandon has even said, I've heard Brandon say out loud that 2.5 should have been 3. And thus 3 would be 4, 4 would be 5, etc.
It's an alternate timeline.
It's an alternate timeline, right? It's just we're still figuring out how to number things. And I feel like the internet in general was still kind of crystallizing on
also
the
feature development, the core feature development. Like there were a lot of things they wanted to do, and so they were moving rapidly.
Yes.
I still think they're moving fairly rapidly on things, but Craft was still, it was still young, so there was a lot to do still. I assume that Brandon had a lot on the roadmap that he wanted to build.
Yeah, and it's worth taking a minor tangent and saying that now they have a team of like 15 people or something, and at this point in time they had a team of like 3. It was, you go back to Craft 1, and you had basically Brad and Brandon.
Right.
I don't know how much Andrus was involved. Maybe barely. Maybe he was. I don't actually know how much Andrus was involved in the early stages of Craft 1. By Craft 2 and 2.5, and certainly by Craft 3, Andrus was like, it was the 3 of them, and they were cranking away. And I don't know when they made their first hire beyond Andrus. But by Craft 3, I'm sure they had either thought about or started hiring someone else. If Brandon's around, we can ask him when they hired somebody. But you can see between Craft 2, go between 2.0 and 2.5, there was some major design shifts. We'll get to in a second within the control panel, the design shifts between 2.0 and 2.5. But even just on the login screen, you can see suddenly the logo becomes editable. And by default, it just shows the text of your site name. I called it Craft 2.5, right? We're not locked into the Craft logo. And, other stuff moved around. The button got bigger, blah, blah, blah. By Craft 3, they were like, yes, we're headed in the right direction. Let's just clean up what we got, right? It starts to look a little sharper here. Starts to look more intentional. And of course, by Craft 4, they're like, yeah, we like all our decisions. So the difference between Craft 3 login and Craft 4 login is super subtle, right? I think one thing that I really appreciate here is the remember me, keep me signed in for, shows you at this point in Craft 4 what you have it set to in the config, right? And so for me, I change my config to be like, hey, if I check this box, remember me for 1 year.
Mm-hmm.
And then the login page reflects that and says, hey, if you check this box, you'll be signed in for 1 year. I like that feature. It's like a really like nice little cherry on top, in my opinion. Craft 5 kept that same 1 year thing, but then they did all this other cool stuff. It's new. It's shiny.
Passkey, yeah. Yep.
And just to reflect, this was 2 fields squished together, a checkbox, a button, a link. This is 2 fields with proper labels, a nice little link underneath, the checkbox. Everything's kind of in a certain order. I'm sure accessibility is playing a pretty big role here.
Mm-hmm.
They have this whole thing in a nice little rectangle. And then the passkey is like that's brand new, right? That didn't even exist in Craft 4. And so now that's joined the party, and they gave the whole thing a little bit of a makeover. And it looks sharp, in my opinion. I haven't used, Ryan, have you used the passkey stuff yet? I haven't done anything with the passkey.
I have, yeah, and actually have a video on it on CraftQuest about using passkey. It's pretty handy, especially, it's going to be different for each domain, essentially, right? So for each environment, you're going to need a different passkey. So it's not like a one password you can just universally fill in the password anywhere. But it's I'm a big fan of like using Touch ID to handle like logging into stuff.
Yeah.
So
if go ahead.
No, I was just gonna say that I have these videos that I did back in, I think, like 2014, 2015 ish. But I want you to tell me when a good time is to like insert like a matrix one or something like that. So when we talk about that.
Yeah, which ones you have matrix? Do you have like an overview one?
I have matrix and field types video queued up, and then I could right now.
Okay. It might be yes. Now is the time. You caught it at the perfect moment, Ryan.
All right.
Here, let me pop out of here. I'm gonna stop sharing my screen.
Oh, you don't have to. That's okay.
Oh, okay. Yeah. You don't like that camera view?
Yeah, you can keep sharing it. All right. So here's the deal. You can keep sharing. I have a switcher here, so I can switch between.
Okay. Truth. I'm used to the Zoom calls.
Yeah. No. So in 2014, I had left my full-time employment to go out to work solo, like indie, doing this time it was Majingo.com, doing training and a little bit of consulting. And I worked with Brandon, Kelly at Pixel and Tonic on some marketing videos to highlight like the new features of Craft, really to kind of set the stage for what Craft could do, because it was so different than WordPress and Expression Engine and other tools that are out there at the time that it was important to differentiate it. So I created a series of short, like 1-minute videos, and I want to play the one that I did for Matrix to start with. So check this out. Here's a simple layout. It has a title and a main content area, but it's pretty boring. Matrix makes it easy to have more complex layouts with content like images and pull quotes, all in the flow of the text. Here we are creating a pull quote. Once we've created the content, we choose which side it appears on, and then drag and drop it to arrange it around our other content. This is possible because of blocks, which are small content pieces that you define in Matrix. Each block can have one or more custom fields. To defining exactly the content you need. And no matter which blocks you use or how you reorder them, your template code always stays the same. And that makes it easy to take something boring and make it better. Okay, so a style very much of its time in terms of
I
the
love
music
it.
and stuff.
I love
Um,
all of it.
and that's like 10 years old. But so that's all very obvious now, right? The idea that you can move this content around, but your template code stays the same, right? So I worked really closely and got tons of very detailed feedback from Brandon on how to position this. But that was the idea: is like, how do you send the message that you can move this stuff around, but this template code is like is really simple and it stays the same. And yeah, so that is the one that I did for Matrix. And yeah, so back then Matrix was really all about, you know, this multimedia content where you had images, you know, set to the right, and you had like maybe a video full bleed or something like that, and that you could do all of that in the flow of the content. Of course, people have used Matrix to like another level, you know, in the last 10 years, um, including like having it be like the underpinning of like all of the content for a site, not just as a way of like tweaking presentation. But that was like the original idea behind it. Yeah, that was fun.
Yeah.
1
It was
minute
pretty,
probably took me 40 hours to make the video or something.
but I love it. I think it's honestly, I think it was exactly what Craft needed and what the it was exactly what we needed to see. It was exactly what Pixel and Tonic needed to be building. There was this moment where people could tell that a rich text editor alone was not going to be good enough.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, ironically now there's this like weird like full circle thing happening where people are just finding ways to do matrixy stuff inside of the rich text editor.
Right.
So you know the jury's a little out still on what the final thing is going to look like, but Matrix was a huge step on that journey. I do now. I feel bad because I have Matrix slides at the end of the presentation. I'm like, oh, I should have sat on that one, but that's
That's all
okay.
good.
I love these videos so much. What are the other two? You had two more. One was like an overview.
One was sections and section types, and then the other one is field types. I have field types queued up, but let's go
Don't
through
do
more of
field
your
types.
slide. What's that?
Don't do field types.
Okay.
Here, let me tell you. Let me tell you. I want you to do field types when I get to the slide called rich text.
Okay.
Stop me.
All right.
Stop me if I get here.
All right.
That's what we're gonna do.
Let's go through your slides again because you have some really nice
Yes.
stuff prepared.
Check this one out. Okay. So we saw the login screen.
Yeah.
Yeah. Get this little guy out of here. Boop. Boop. Okay.
Oh wow.
In Craft One, this is 2013 according to the footer.
Uh-huh.
June 2013. We have Quick Post, which only existed in Craft One. Do you remember Quick Post?
I thought Quick Post is still there. Is it not there?
Maybe it's just not there by default. Maybe
Okay.
you have to enable
I think it still exists.
It still exists? Okay.
I think so.
So it still exists. We have a tab navigation. I think that's the most defining feature about Craft 1 and 2.0 was that the entire navigation was up at the top. And by Craft 2.0, they have started to figure out one of the things here is you'll notice there was like a fixed width for the center column.
Mm-hmm.
And then they abandoned that because responsive design was all the rage, right? So they went to a full width in Craft 2.0. They still had the tab navigation. They're trying to figure out what to do with the settings stuff. And so they put it all the way over here on the right with like a drop down.
Yeah.
Right. So you have this like drop down where you could like jump to. And actually, I think that is super cool, except that as soon as you introduce the sidebar nav in 2.5, it stops making sense.
Yeah.
You don't need that expansion anymore. So in 2.0, the other thing they did in 2.0 was they made these H1 tags red, which I don't know why, but they did, and I guess it looked good. At the top, you had this very prominent dev mode
Yeah.
banner. If you're in dev mode, like you can't miss it, right?
Right.
So your tab navigation, prominent dev mode, these red header tags. They abandoned the max width, and there's this settings drop down. But by 2.5, they changed everything except the red header tags. They kept the red header tags. They made the dev mode banner a little more subtle, which is legit. Like it doesn't need to be in your face, right? Um, and this help widget got an overhaul. This help widget was just a form.
Right.
Send a
And then it
message to craft
became,
support.
yeah, it became a couple options. Yep.
And then they changed it to get help and give feedback. And I think give feedback goes to like GitHub, and get help, I don't know what it does. I didn't click on it. It
Yeah.
might go to like Stack Exchange or something. In Craft 3, they kept a lot of the broad design choices, but they did clean it up a lot, right? They stuck with the side navigation. They made the dev mode banner a little more subtle. It's down at the bottom,
Yep.
right? They changed the header tags back to black. This 2 was the only one where it was red. So in Craft 1, the H1s were black, and Craft 2.0 and 2.5, they were red for whatever reason. In Craft 3, they went back to black and they've stayed black.
Yeah.
You've also got in Craft 3, the footer links were also moved to utilities. I got a slide on that in a minute. But these links down here that said check for updates and server info, they went into the utilities section. And Craft 4 stuck with all those same decisions, because when Craft 3 did all of its stuff, by the end of Craft 3, they were like, this is what we always wanted the CMS to be.
Yep.
And so Craft 4 is mostly just a layer of polish. Although I will say, they added these little these user icons up in the corner. Mine's like green on green, so it doesn't look that special, but that is an automatic color generated user icon. And that did not exist in 3. But that's the only real difference. And then in Craft 5, functionally it's the same, but you can see visually they just changed the theme. They went with like a low contrast theme. And one thing that I really like, that might be like my favorite part of Craft 5, is this toggleable sidebar. You can collapse the whole sidebar.
Yeah, that was a nice touch. But the sidebar, like on the dashboard at least, like the sidebar and then those widget boxes, that's been consistent going back to what, 2.5?
The widget, let's see.
Yeah.
2.5. Yep.
Yeah.
From 2.0 to 2.5 was when they made the sidebar change.
Yep.
And that was one of the biggest architectural shifts ever in the Craft UX, going from this tab navigation to the sidebar navigation in 2.5. I mean, when we talk about 2.5 being its own major version, you can see why, right? It was worthy of being its own major version.
And that's not even talking about the actual functionality changes as well.
Yeah.
Yeah.
In fact, from a functionality standpoint, under the hood, there wasn't anything major in 2.5. I think there might have been some changes with drafts. We'll get to a draft slide.
Yeah.
And you can check my work, because there's a couple of things here coming up with like drafts and something else, assets, which I want your input on, because
Okay. I'm not sure how reliable it'll be. I know I've recorded hundreds of hours of video, but it all moves so quickly that I find myself forgetting, because I'm always like just so focused in on what the current thing is. That's why this is so fascinating to me.
will allow me to remind you.
Oh, and file structure. Oh boy, here we go. Go ahead.
There was once a period of time when the Craft file structure, before Composer, the Craft file structure was basically your Craft folder and your public folder. Straight up. Everything was in one of these two buckets. And the public folder as it was is not super different from the public folder as you know it today. And it can go by many names. It can be public, it can be web, it can be public underscore HTML. It can literally be anything you want, really. There's the craft folder and the public folder. Within the craft folder, you had the app folder, which was Craft itself. And now in order to run an update of Craft at this time, you would have to, you could delete the app folder, but you're better off just renaming it and set it aside for a second.
App
Mark it for deletion.
Old. Right.
Yes.
Right. Yeah.
Exactly. And then take the new app folder for the newer version of Craft, drop it in its place, and then go into, this was before Composer, so you had to go into the control panel and let Craft in the browser run the migrations.
Right.
And cross your fingers because, there was like a 80 to 90% hit rate, which was pretty good, but, it's not 100. So this is how it was done. That was how it was done before Composer in Craft 1 and 2. And so again, Craft 2.5 didn't change this paradigm. 2.5 only changed the UX in the control panel.
Got it.
It wasn't until 3.0 that they switched everything out for this file structure instead when they started using Composer.
And this was dot all. Was it called dot all then? Yeah. In Portland, right? Was the lead up to Craft 3?
Maybe. It was 2018. Sounds about right.
Right, because I did like a full day or half day training class getting ready for Craft 3. Is that right?
Was it all about Composer? Was it a lot of Composer stuff?
Yeah, it was 2018 because I remember distinctly I was training for for my first marathon, and because I remember running in Portland. Or a half marathon. I can't remember. But anyway, yes. So was that right?
So once we had Composer in place, then everything starts to live in the vendor folder.
Yep.
And so then there was also this very conscious choice to change up the two folder structure with something that was a little bit more open-ended. That was just like, listen, this is your, believe it or not, the public folder didn't go anywhere. The public folder is exactly where it was before, right?
Yeah.
In
the chat, John Morton says the update process pre-Composer brings back bad memories.
Yes.
And then Mark said that he didn't have generally too many problems with it, but looking back, that was dangerous business. I mean, that was also common for how you upgraded software on the web back then too.
It's how it was done.
Yeah.
It's how it was, it was like before cars had airbags, if you compare this update process, now WordPress has been they've got their one-click thing for a long time. But if you compare it to most other CMSs, they're just as bad, if not worse than that.
So I will say, though, that I know there are people that have problems updating Craft, even, with Craft 5, right? You have problems with running an update for all sorts of reasons. I want to say most of it's probably like project config related or something like that. Mm-hmm. But the reliability of updating Craft in the post-Composer world, if you're very careful and strict about your moving from environment to environment, I think it's really, really, really reliable now compared to how it was. And if something does go wrong, the rollback process is so much easier now because you're not, it's just Composer. So you can just, back off a change to your composer.lock file and then, reinstall everything and be on your way.
As long as you backed up your database.
Right. Well, if you didn't get to the migrations. But a lot of times, Composer protects you from installing packages that won't work together. So you never do get to the migrations at that point.
Yeah, it doesn't, if you have some sort of deployment script set up, like a simple deployment script that just says, hey, after you install, run craft up and clear the cache or whatever it is, if Composer fails, you just never get to that stuff. So you're, like you said, you're protected from tripping over yourself. Back in these days, if something went wrong, you had to rename your new app folder to get it out of the way, unrename your old app folder, roll back your database, and then figure out what went wrong. And sometimes it was a craft bug, and sometimes it was a plugin bug, and sometimes it was a local development environment bug, because this was also pre DDev and also, I believe, pre Nitro.
Oh yeah, for sure. Yeah.
This was
Nitro
the
came out around COVID, like early COVID, I think.
so 2020
2020.
ish.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I
So
just remember I have distinct memories of working out of my TV room
yeah,
doing Nitro
on
stuff.
Nitro.
Yeah.
Nice. Yeah, and that was so before we had any local development environment, everything was the Wild West, and some people were using MAMP, and some people were using uh,
Valet. Yep.
Valet. That's what I was using,
Yeah, me
Valet.
too.
And it was good for what it was, but it didn't save you from a lot of the. I like DDev a lot better. DDev is the
I
answer
agree.
to a lot of the things
Yeah.
here.
All right.
And by
Go
the
ahead.
way, side note, spoiler alert, I have all of these versions running on my computer right now.
Wow, that's to me. All right. Is that the grand finale? Is going
We
through
can
those?
after I do the whole show,
Okay.
we can go into that world and poke around
All
and
right.
you just ask me questions and I'll show you what it looks like.
Okay. Let's keep
We
going then, so we can get to that.
Okay, cool. All right, cool. So pre-composer, post-composer. One thing I'm going to note too while we're here is in pre-composer there was a craft folder, and post-composer they got rid of that. But one of the key reasons for getting rid of that was so they could have a craft file, right?
Yep.
So craft folder, craft file. Now, why is that important?
That's your
Because it
your
gives you
executable for the CLI. Yep.
so you can do craft space up or craft space migrate all, right? And you get like it's all becomes available to you when you get the craft folder out of the way, and you can put a craft shell script in its place.
Mm-hmm.
It's just that simple. And that's really all I have to say about console commands. Not really a visual thing, you know? It's not something that changed even much over time. Like, yeah, they added more console commands between Craft 3 and Craft 5, but
Yep.
There's only so much time in a presentation.
Plugins. This is where
Yes.
you've been involved pretty regularly. When did you create your first plugin?
The year was 2000. It was like 2012 or 2013. It must have been 2013. It was the original version. No, actually, before the original version of Smart Map, which was like 2012 for Craft
Wow.
1. Yep. There was a couple of little plugins that I did. One was called PHP Tweak, which would show you the PHP settings, kind of like how the utilities does now, how it just shows you what your PHP settings are. I had a plugin that did that and also let you override them via Twig, which is actually just like wildly dangerous. And so, but that was Craft 1, and that sort of thing flew. And then CPCSS probably came along around that time, maybe by Craft 2. Somewhere between Craft 1 and Craft 2, CPCSS came along. And then CPJS followed, and AdWizard came around. I did AdWizard when Elements became a big thing,
Yep.
which I think was Craft 2?
Yeah.
Or Craft, yeah.
So before Craft 3, there's no plugin store. How did people install plugins? How do they find and install plugins? It was a little bit of a kind of anything goes world, right?
I'm glad you asked. Before Craft 3, you had to go to the place where the plugin was, download the zip file. It could have been anywhere. Yeah. It could have been somebody's private store. It could have been on GitHub if you were lucky. It could have been anywhere. You get this plugin, you unzip it, and you just put it in the plugins folder. Ta-da! You're done. It's like the whole story. You put in the plugins folder. You do still have to go into the control panel and install it, right? That part didn't change. But in terms of you just and The same thing was actually true if you wanted to do a custom plugin. This is pre-modules, right? So the idea of modules didn't exist either. If you want to do a custom plugin, you just put a folder in the plugins folder and you structure your plugin as a plugin should be structured, and then things work. It's way better in Composer,
Yeah.
just for all the reasons, right? And so now it's in the vendor folder under the company name and then the plugin name. It's structured properly, and it's here alongside Craft CMS, right? So in the where is it? Vendor Craft CMS, right? Yeah. Vendor double secret agency Craft CPCOZ. It makes sense.
Yep.
It's how it should
Everything's
be.
a composer package.
Yeah, and the world is better for it.
Yep.
So, you know, that was a pretty cool change, and I think it was a pretty landmark moment in
Yeah, I
craft.
mean, you kind of glossed over the the plugin store, but that's not
Oh, the
only
plugin store.
the
We could talk about the
yeah.
plugin store.
So
I didn't want to go too into the weeds on
well,
it, but yeah.
just in terms of like how it uh, helps centralize and solidify the plugin ecosystem. And I don't remember if there was any like negative feedback about the plugin store. Like you don't have to be in the plugin. Offer a, uh, I guess even a paid plugin, right, outside of the plugin store, if you wanted to manage that all yourself.
I think on a technical level you can,
I'm
but
not
it
sure if the
created
like how that works, but
licensing issues
right,
and technical issues that were absolutely not worth it. And I don't know if I ever saw someone try. I feel
but
like once maybe somebody talked about doing it.
right, but the plugin store it it boosted the community in a way that hadn't happened before because now there was one place to go find plugins, whether they're free or paid. But also, um, plenty of people had created like small businesses out of selling plugins that people really need or wanted, and then that, of course, if you're if you're built something that you're selling and you're making money from it, you're automatically invested in that community. So to me, it sort of became like the hub around which like the community started to gather and grow. Was through the plugin store, building on all of the like organic excitement about craft as a modern alternative to other CMSs. And then the plugin store has been really, really, really fascinating to watch. I don't think
Yeah.
and it's like it's there, but you can, and the licensing, like all the behind the scenes stuff with the licensing, like you don't have to go to the plugin store to install something. Like you can do it, via Composer. Um, but just the idea that it helped build a central hub for finding stuff and a place where, good developers with good ideas could make, um, money selling their plugin to someone. Super cool. I think it was a pretty
Yeah.
pivotal moment for craft.
I fully agree. I fully agree. It couldn't have been possible without Composer.
Right.
It was absolutely a pivotal moment. It meant that there was some authenticity to everything listed in the plugin store because you knew that Pixel and Tonic was, you can have your own opinions about the level of verification that they do, but they are looking at it. They are looking at every single one of these plugins before they approve it.
Right.
So it's not just like nonstop junk floating through here. It also created an ecosystem, like an economy, a marketplace that was, like you said, like disparate, like it was all over the place before. There was at least two, if not three, individual stores and or people running their own, like just selling their own plugins
Or
or using some.
indexes. I know that
Yeah,
uh that
barrel strength,
Ben from
Sprout.
yeah, from Sprout he still has the uh oh gosh, top shelf.
What's it
No,
called?
it's not top shelf craft.
No,
That's
I can
Michael.
see it.
Uh anyway,
uh
but I think he like was indexing the plugins
Straight up
early on.
craft.
Straight up craft. He was
Straight up
indexing the
craft.
plugins early on as well.
Yes.
So there were
But it
people
was
doing it
mostly a
before.
directory,
Right,
and then
right,
eventually he turned the directory into a store,
right.
and then this came out shortly
Yeah,
afterwards.
yeah.
um and so, like it was good to consolidate that into one place because it started to make things make more sense. Plus, you had these like one-click installs, which were fantastic. You could literally go through the plugin store and be like, "Oh, I want to try this plugin." Click, click, and then like within a minute,
Yep.
sitting there ready for you to poke at. And so, like you said, it was a pretty pivotal moment in the history of Craft itself.
Yeah.
Um,
What's next?
Great question.
Oh,
Tools and
tools. Okay.
utilities.
Yeah.
I
Let's look at that.
mentioned this earlier, and so we don't need to like spend too much time on it. But the gist of it is that in Craft 2.5, even after using the sidebar, even after moving the navigation to the sidebar, we had tools in the settings tools, but in Craft 3, they moved all of those tools into utilities, which seemed like almost like a technical subtle change, but it really is a world of difference in terms of UX because utilities is always right there on the sidebar. You don't have to go through settings to get it. And most of the things in here basically are utilities. Like clearing the cache is a utility. Like you just want to do a quick thing and then move on. So I think that was a wise choice. They also, and I didn't highlight this in the screenshot, but way down here on the 2.5 on the left, in the footer, there's check for updates and server info. And those
Yeah.
also got moved
To utilities.
to utilities. Yeah. So, that was a really nice change. It doesn't get a lot of shout outs because it's so technical and boring. But there it is. Yay. Shout out for utilities. So
Good job, utilities.
good job, utilities. Assets and file systems.
Oh yeah.
I'm going to throw this out here, but there's some gaps in what you're about to see. So if you have any knowledge or memories to contribute, please jump in. My knowledge of assets and file systems is basically this. In Craft 1 and 2, all you could do was create a local folder,
Yep.
period. Very boring. In Craft 3, again, we got our composer shift. We have the plugin store shift. And so there were, you know what? Actually, there was a way to do cloud assets. We're going to see a glimpse of this at the end. There was a way to do cloud assets, but I don't remember how it worked. And it was like a separate add-on kind of thing. We'll come back to that.
Okay. I don't remember either. All right.
Yeah, we'll come back to that. You have now a variety of cloud storage plugins. There was the S3 plugin. There was what's the Google, whatever it is.
Yeah.
They're all out there. And today, there's more than ever. You go on, there's probably like a dozen cloud storage plugins. But Amazon S3 was like the main and the first one.
And first party. Not all of them are first party. Yeah.
That is an excellent point. That is an excellent, excellent point. This was made by Pixel and Tonic to scratch a very specific itch for free. They did it partly because they knew it was such a high demand item, partly because they didn't want there's certain things that Pixel and Tonic doesn't want you to have to pay for, right? And it's a little hazy. I'm not trying to get inside their brains or anything, but you can tell that they think that certain things like a rich text editor should be free.
Yeah.
That's fair. There's lines to be drawn. And so they feel that way about cloud storage, and I think that's appreciated by most people.
Absolutely.
Craft 4 I didn't take a screenshot of it in a way that you could see. But in Craft 3, they had assets, straight up. You configure your asset volume as is. In Craft 4, they separated them into file systems.
Mm-hmm.
So you have your file systems and your asset volumes. This is where it starts to get beyond me. And then I can't remember if in Craft 4 your file systems could be reused by multiple asset sources. Multiple asset sources could point to the same file system. So, for example, the idea being that you install the Amazon S3 plugin, you set up Amazon S3 as one file system,
right?
And then your asset sources, your asset volumes can all pull from that same bucket without having to redefine. Because back in the early days,
you had to just.
I think there was like a cloud thing here. It was the add-on, and wherever it was, Craft 3. Even in Craft 3, when they were still unified, they weren't separated. You had to redeclare the Amazon credentials for every single asset volume.
Yep.
Do you remember that?
I do.
Yeah. Fun times. So after enough pressure, they split those. And I think again, there's gaps in here. I think in Craft 5, they did some further splitting that I don't fully understand to make it even more reusable. A lot of the asset stuff is over my head, so feel free to correct me on any of it. Similarly,
Oh, talking about changes. Yeah.
change. So, drafts and revisions are really interesting because they're so critical. They're so critical. But there was a time when they didn't exist.
Yeah.
There was no. People are like, I need to be able to save a draft. And they're like, we'll get there. I mean, it's Craft 1. You know, what are you going to do? You can see the save button, which, by the way, is way down at the bottom, right? So you have your tabs at the top, and down way at the bottom is save. You want to save and continue editing or save and add another, but there's no mention of drafts because they don't exist. And unfortunately, that was still true in Craft 2, which, by the way, is so far down off the page that it's pushing my title up off the top of the page because the button is so low, but still no mention of drafts. So, you know, Craft 2.0, nothing drafty here.
Yeah.
In Craft 2.5, we get our first mention of a draft. Save as a draft in 2.5. Now remember, 2.5 is where they did the whole shuffle, where the top tabs became a sidebar and other stuff moved around. Drafts was probably one of the more technical improvements of 2.5.
Mm-hmm.
But I don't really know how well it worked, but I feel like it was very rudimentary, right? And so by the time 3.0 came out, they had a little more confidence in how drafts were supposed to be working. And to call back to something that you said early on, and I think this is critically important, from the early points of 3 to the later points of 3, so 3.1, 3.2, all the way up to like 3.5, 3.6, 3.7, there were some things that really crystallized and took form, and they went through their cocoon and came out the other side like a beautiful butterfly. Butterfly? No, cocoons are moths. A beautiful moth came out the other side. And drafts were one of those things. Drafts between I don't know the exact pointage, but between 3.1 and 3.6, drafts went from being super shaky and good luck to you to use them to by 3.6, it's like, dude, why not use drafts? They're awesome. They do everything you want them to do. Revisions were the same way. And revisions aren't really reflected in these screenshots. And I do often lump together drafts and revisions in a way that confuses me even. But they both went through because they are close, they went through a similar transformation around the same time. So
yeah.
By Craft 3, you had a very stable, by the end of Craft 3, you had a very stable draft system. And you can see that because when they went to Craft 4, they didn't change a single thing. They changed nothing about the draft system in Craft 4. It works just as the way it is. And in Craft 5, they mostly kept it, but the UX is different, and they move stuff around, and there's the squiggly line up at the top, and now underneath of the right side. Oh, which, by the way, we didn't even mention this. The right sidebar in Craft 5 is also collapsible.
That's right. That's right.
I think that's pretty cool. A little underrated, but very cool. Now in this collapsible right sidebar, at the bottom is a notation that's a draft. In your header breadcrumbs, it's a notation that you got a draft, and then but largely the options are the same. They didn't change it, really. So drafts in modern craft, drafts and revisions are 100% reliable. You can use them the way you want to use them, the way you expect to use them, and you will get what you want out of them. If you start doing some weird stuff off the deep end and, trying to hack it via the plugins or whatever, you might find some edge cases. But for normal people, nothing wrong with using drafts.
Right.
And to be honest, it's the same story with project config. A nearly identical story. Project Config did not exist until Craft 3.0. It just didn't. Craft 1, Craft 2, no concept of Project Config. They knew people had been asking for a way to manage fields and sections and whatnot
Yeah,
via
let's
text
not
files.
let's not gloss over that. So it used to be where if I created a new section or new fields locally for a feature, to get that onto staging or production, I had to go recreate those because they were solely saved in the database. So the idea of Project Config was that this was um like a version controllable set of files that would Craft would then read and make those database changes in any environment once you applied those. Um, it was like a little bit of a bumpy road to get to where we are now,
Hmm.
but I see that absolutely as like a pivotal change in Craft that allowed it to be like a truly modern deployable application versus
Yeah.
before. Because now people did like export databases and then go import in production. Or if you were brave, you might do partial, exports and imports. But that's not the way to do these types of changes. Like migrations is one thing you could do, but like big migrations like that, you really want to do if you're doing like a data migration. You take the site down, you do a migration. But for settings and stuff, yeah, that should all be file based, and that's what Project Config brought us. Project Config was opt in. It's not opt in anymore. It's required,
No,
but
they
it used
removed
to be
that.
opt in up
Yeah.
until was it Craft 4? I don't remember when they made it mandatory.
It was either late 3 or 4.
Yeah,
Yeah.
but we all take it for granted now. But it didn't used to be like that. Yeah,
It didn't exist. I mean,
right.
our workflow prior to Craft 3, prior to Project Config, our workflow was, yeah, you dabble around a little bit into figuring out what your sections are, and then we would go into the production environment, create the sections or fields that we need, export the production database to our
Right.
local,
Yep.
then locally write all the twig for it, then push up the twig,
Yeah.
and then start adding content.
Yep. Yeah.
Like it was, and so yeah, the YAML files made a huge difference. But to your point, when they were first introduced, they were pretty shaky, kind of like
Yeah.
drafts, which is why I put these two back to back.
Yep.
They were in 3.0 they were introduced. I believe Project Config was introduced in 3.0 or 3.1. 3.2, it was still a lot of crossing your fingers when you used it, which is why it was opt out. I was on day one. I don't think it was opt out, but I think enough people were like, "Hey, this thing is crazy and it's blowing stuff up," and so they were like, "Okay, how about we do an opt out for it?" And so they did an opt out, and that opt out lasted probably until like 3.1 or 3.2, all the way up until like 3.7 or 4.0.
Right.
And
Which I'm glad that like I feel like I used it from the beginning, and I'm glad a lot of people did because the only way for them to have been able to iron out those issues was if people use them, if they hit those edge cases.
100%.
Yeah, it's complicated.
Somebody's got
Like
to be the guinea pig.
we shouldn't undersell like the complexity of syncing, files like that in settings. So, but yeah,
Yeah.
important change for sure.
I think one of the things to note about that, about this project config, about the drafts, about like cloud assets, this sort of thing. There was a point in time when, like in Craft One, it was okay for it to be mostly hobbyists.
Hmm.
That it was people who were just playing around to see what it could do, kick the tires, build up a few marketing sites on it. Every once in a while, build a bigger website and like see how far you could push Craft. And that's how it became Craft 2 and Craft 3 and Craft 4. Like it's evolving because, like you said, we're being the guinea pigs. And if we all of these changes amount to taking Craft from like a little hobbyist toy to something that can really be used reliably with large websites, with large clients, with serious data sets.
Right.
That there was a point in time where you would be like, it's a brave move using Craft One for your, film archive or whatever it is. And then here on Craft 5, it's like, why not? It's got
Yeah. No
everything
brainer.
you need. It's a
Yeah.
no brainer. And so, oh yeah, I guess there's only one slide for project config.
All right. So,
We have it now.
yeah,
Ta-da!
project config. All right. So you talked about
and so
rich
now
text.
it's trust. Yeah, interrupt me. This is it. And
All
I
right.
don't need to. Here, I'm gonna
Yeah, you can
stop
just
this
stay
so I
right
can
where you're
see
at. So
stuff.
this is another video I did on for a marketing video called Field Types. This is the Field Types video. All right, let's check this out. Here's a website with 3 types of content: news articles, case studies, and an about page. Now, each of these content types has different requirements. News articles need a title, subtitle, and body content, while case studies have a large featured image and quotes. And the about page has section headers in the page copy. Well, Craft lets us define these content types using sections and custom fields. So here we are creating a case study in our work section. We've set the title and added our copy. But let's add a color picker field so we can specify a theme for each case study we publish. After we create our custom fields, we can then add or reorder them in field layouts. And that's how easy it is to set up Craft exactly how your content requires. Okay, so
That's incredible.
the architecture drawing for the fields and stuff, right? Yeah.
I forgot about that.
I forgot about that.
Just forgot about that.
So again,
that
the
one
like
did get
sections, section types, field types, and the layouts, like that's all. That was all something that had to be explained because it wasn't like an obvious thing that people were asking about. But once you understood the power of it, that you could use those different things instead of these different types of sections or different types of sections. So in the same section, you could have different types of content. Pretty cool.
That was pretty cool. Yeah, because that was basically entry types is what we were looking at there.
Yeah.
Right. Yeah, it's super cool, and that was like a mini revolution on its own. Because I should mark in here somewhere where entry types showed up, but it wasn't in Craft 1. Craft 1, the entry was the entry.
Right.
I'm not even sure it was in Craft 2 at all. It might not have been until Craft 3 where we actually had like legit entry types.
Yeah, so that video was also 2014.
Oh no, that was 2. It was
2.
Craft 2.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And you could see like the UI widgets in the browser. I think I did that in Safari, right? Like just like how like antiquated some of those already look. All right, what do we have? What else you got? Rich text?
I love it. I love it. Okay, so rich text, you kind of got a glimpse of it in that video where were editing text. There was a time when there were no plugins. Well, there were plugins, but there were no rich text plugins because there was only one rich text field. It was native to Craft itself, and it was redactor.
Mm-hmm.
So you have this native redactor field, and it's called rich text, and that's the entire story. But obviously, people were like, "Hey, redactor's fine, but what about CK editor?" CK editor was on the scene for quite a long time, and so in response to demand for alternate choices, when Craft 3 rolled out, and Composer rolled out, and the plugin store rolled out, they took the rich text editor and they extracted it.
Yeah.
And they also introduced a CK editor plugin. I very distinctly remember at it was one of the dot alls where they were announcing this, probably the one where you did all the videos for. They had one slide up on the screen which had the plugin icon for redactor and the plugin icon for CK editor. And it was right after they had talked about the plugin store, so it was obvious what they were talking about. It was very cool, and that I think also was a pretty big moment. And then from that point on, the redactor plugin was just recommended. They're like, use redactor. It's basically what you've been using natively. The CK editor plugin exists, but it was so unloved. It was so for years.
Yeah.
It was just, it makes me sad thinking about it. It just sat there on the shelf collecting dust in like roughly a beta state for many years. Listen, I can't be too critical. I am guilty of my fair share of this, but it's interesting to see how, as times have changed and we've reached Craft 5, it's now the Redactor plugin, which is fully abandoned.
Sent off the
And the
pasture.
C,
Yeah.
yeah, it's on a big farm upstate,
Yeah.
like,
Well, there were
and the
technical reasons
CK,
for that, right? Like, um, was
well,
it?
Redactor abandoned it.
Oh, okay.
The
Redactor
company behind
abandoned
Redactor,
itself. Yeah.
Imperavi, yeah,
Yeah. Got it. Okay. Yep. So
Imperavi
no
abandoned
path
Redactor.
forward.
No path forward, yeah. And in fact, not only that, Imperavi had written alternates to Redactor like at least twice over since then. They were like,
Yeah.
oh, it's Redactor 2, and then there was like some, you know, heir to that also. But
Yeah.
anyways, they finally killed off Redactor. It's marked as abandoned. But I will say this, for any confusion for people who are still updating from older websites. If you're working with a website that is using Craft 3, use Redactor. If you use Redactor until you're on Craft 4, get onto Craft 4, get onto the latest version of Craft 4, and then you can switch from Redactor to the new CK Editor plugin. They are different.
Yeah.
It was re-released effectively. I don't know if it was name changed or anything like that, but the long forgotten CK Editor plugin is nothing like the new and improved CK Editor plugin, right, Ryan? That's
Yeah.
true.
True.
No, there's no blood shared between them, and so get to Craft 4, but don't try this transition until you're on Craft 4. Then switch it, and then update to Craft 5 with CK Editor in hand, and then you'll be happier. That's how the flow should go, because that's how history unfolded.
Right.
Um, you know, weird world with rich
Yeah.
text editors.
All right. Matrix.
This is
Never
where
heard
I
of this.
this is where I should have had you play the Matrix video. So just everybody in your mind, just like rewind like 30 minutes back to, oh yeah, oh I see those cool blocks. Cool. So the Matrix, a very revolutionary concept in and of itself. For oh goodness, sorry, for all the obvious reasons. But in Craft 1, it didn't exist.
Yep.
Was there, Ryan, you might know this better than I do. Was there a Matrix equivalent on Expression Engine at this time? Or not yet?
Uh,
I feel like it
there
might have
was a
existed
Matrix.
over.
Yeah.
It was, right? Was it called Matrix?
I think it was called Matrix.
I think it was.
That's why the name
And
was so familiar.
yeah.
So Brandon did, he had Wigwam, speaking of rich text
Yes.
editors, and of course Playa, which was the relationship,
Relational.
yeah,
Yep.
multi-relationship, hence the name. And then
Mm-hmm.
and there was Matrix, right? This is
I
the
think
problem,
Matrix.
is that so much of this has kind of
Yep.
bled together for me. But yeah.
Is lost to the sands of time. But no, I think you're right. In fact, I almost want to say that Matrix was like the top seller of them.
Yep.
And so when Craft came out, it was a lot of like, hey, where's the Matrix for this? And I think from day one, Brandon was like,
I was like, I just
there was
built
a
a
handful of things.
CMS.
Yeah, yes, that's probably what he was saying. What do you want from me? So, but Craft 2, they did release a Matrix field, and it was good. For all intents and purposes, it was the same Matrix field that we used up through Craft 4.
Okay, so in the chat, Mark says Matrix has always been Matrix, even in EE. All right, great. Thank you for
Okay, cool. Thank you for confirming.
Yeah.
Appreciate it. There was a handful of things that Brandon wanted to do from Craft 1 that he knew he had to wait on, like Matrix, like the plugin store. They wanted to make a plugin store from day one.
Mm-hmm.
And they were just like, we can't do it at the same moment. I think there was probably already notions of draft and revisions, but Matrix was probably the biggest and arguably, I don't know. It was one of the most revolutionary for sure.
Yep.
All they did in 2.5 was adjust the layout because they had a sidebar now. In Craft 3, they changed like nothing, right? They didn't change much between 2 and 4. Like it's literally, this is 3 and 4. They're the exact same thing.
Yeah.
Craft 5 changed everything. And I'll talk about this for like 5 seconds and then defer to your probably many videos on this subject. As you know, matrix blocks, because they are elements, became entries.
Yep.
And so now you have entry types
Those are block
representing
types.
as block types. And for anybody who's been working with craft for a long time, this is such an epic paradigm shift that you really have to rewire your brain a little bit.
You have to
Like
think
I'm,
about it when you first start. You'd be like, okay, wait a second, what now? Yeah, I do have some videos
yeah,
on. There's an early video I did on the in the beta period where I went through the one I did where I went through kind of like the back end changes, and then another one where I just went through like what the actual developer experience is like because of this change and how to rethink it. But yeah, it
yeah,
takes the first time you'd be like, wait, what now?
yeah. Still to me,
Yeah,
but especially the first time because it's just so different. Now, if you're starting with craft as a newbie, you're like, oh, this is pretty cool. This makes sense. I see this goes over here. I can see how these things tie together. It's not as much of a remapping of your brain because you're starting fresh. But for all us olds, it's
yep,
we're getting there. We're getting there. It's a good thing. Um, oh, and here's the illustration of it. I should have jumped to this. In Craft 2.4 or 2 to 4, a matrix block was exactly that.
yep,
And in Craft 5, it is much more than that. In fact, there's also the alternate views
yeah.
of
There's
matrix
different.
fields.
You have
And
like the
again, I'll
table
defer to you.
view, and yeah, there's different views.
The block view or whatever it
Yeah.
is, and like the card view. That's what it is. Um,
You could
yeah,
argue that Matrix Craft 2 to Craft 4 is completely different than Matrix and Craft 5 in how you can use it and how it can be like the content can be surfaced in different views in different areas. Uh, but I understand it's
yeah.
conceptually it's supposed to be the same thing, but it's
I would
really
actually,
not.
I would absolutely make that case. Yeah,
Yeah.
I would agree with that statement wholeheartedly. It breaks so far beyond the bounds of what a matrix field was
Right.
prior to Craft 5 that it's just running wild. You can do whatever you want with it. Um, so all right, buckle up. Uh, pricing.
Mm.
We're getting towards the end.
Okay.
If any pricing is fascinating because for a long time it's looked something like this. And this is the modern prices. This is exactly what it looks like right now.
Yep.
You have your free solo, you have your team plan at 279 and your pro at 399. And now pro these are prices went up recently. Previously pro was 299
299.
and two team didn't exist. Is that right?
That's right.
And that was true for a long time. Uh, there was something else that occupied this team slot a long time ago. Do you remember what it was called?
It was client, I think, right? Or
Client.
yeah,
And what was it? It was one admin and one non-admin. Was that what it was?
something like that. Yeah, it was kind of limited, and it
And they
was
killed it off because not enough people were using it.
not enough people using it. Yeah, and the pro license 299. I want to say the pro license. I want to say Brandon told me that it was 299 for like 5 years or even longer,
Mm,
maybe, and enough to where like essentially it was getting cheaper, and or they were losing money and it was getting cheaper and cheaper with inflation and stuff. So they didn't.
yeah,
They
especially like post,
post COVID. Yep.
2024 prices. Yeah,
Yep.
like it. I don't think I think certainly people balked initially when they saw the price go up, but once it had time to set in, I think everybody understood that it was justified.
Yep.
But I will say, just a tale of that story is that there was no team plan at that moment in time. And there was enough of an uproar from the community that said, hey, you bumped the price of the high end. There's no middle tier. What do we do when we have just a small number of people that need to access a site? And so they introduced Teams is interesting because it's one admin and then four other users. Is that what it is? And you can initially you couldn't even have a user group. It was just like they had what no permissions or I don't know what it was or it was five admins.
Yeah, they had
and
all
they introduced T.
permissions. Yeah.
And people were like, well, that's also not useful to us. And so Pixel and Tonic tweaked that, and they ended up with this, which I think is a pretty solid compromise. You have 5 users, only one of them is required to be an admin, and the other 4 can fit into one specific user group with shared permissions, whatever you deem those permissions to be. I think that's a legitimate compromise. All right, are you ready for this?
Let's do it.
Prior to Craft 2, so between Craft 2 and Craft 5, there was some variation of this. Prior to Craft 2, you had
Whoa,
packages.
that's right.
You completely forgot about this.
I did. Now it looks like it won't even load the prices for you when you were
It
trying to.
won't even load the prices for me.
Publish Pro. That's right. You could add these different packages. I totally forgot about that. Huh.
You basically had to build your own Craft Pro by
Yeah.
putting together the puzzle pieces.
Right.
And so it's
Rebrand.
very,
Yeah.
very interesting to see the different directions that these things took, because Publish Pro is now just Craft. That's just in Craft, right? Users became Pro, but also now Teams feature. That one took a reasonable course. Cloud became a
Free.
series of free plugins.
Right.
Not just free, but also plugins, right? So
Right.
it's a series of free plugins.
Rebrand is now free.
Free,
Oh well,
native.
email notifications are that's Pro, right?
Maybe. The
Yeah.
email notifications might be elevated,
Yeah.
but you can change the logo for free, for
Right.
sure. And localize, which is just multi-language, right? Multi-site. That is now free and a major selling feature, right? So wild times. You used to have to start with free and then tack these on one at a time. It was like $29 and $49 or whatever they were, and just pick and choose the ones that you cared about. And then Craft 2 rolled around and they were like, that was crazy. Like,
Yeah.
we don't know what we were playing, what we were thinking with that. So how about a more reasonable? And then they went to a system which is a precursor to this.
Right.
Right. And that's
so
probably when they had the free and the client and the pro plan was probably as early as Craft 2, I believe.
Mm-hmm. I totally forgot about packages, man. That's the biggest surprise so far of the presentation.
Pretty wild ride, right? That's why I saved it for the end.
Okay. Here we go.
This is just a very quick. This is the tail end of the whole thing. This is a very quick hop skip down memory lane where we're just going to glance at the change log of every version that we've talked about.
Okay.
Here we go. In November 13th of 2012, the private beta kicked off as 0.9.2063. Like, wow,
exciting times.
Exciting times. And then, as we mentioned, on June 4th of 2013, they released 1.0. And one of the exciting things here was that live preview came into being. There were certain things I mentioned earlier, that there were certain things Brandon always wanted to exist from before day one that he couldn't get to right away, like the plugin store or the matrix field. Live preview, they were lucky enough to get into version 1.0. I think that they considered that a critical feature at that moment.
Yeah. Oh no. We lost Lindsey again. Lindsey, you froze if you can hear me.
No, man, this is unfortunate. We're right at the end. Can you
hear
hear
me? I hear you again.
Okay. Can you hear me? Can you just see my slide? Okay,
yeah.
Perfect. So I was saying that there were certain things that Brandon always wanted to get in, and he couldn't get them out on day one, like the matrix field or like the plugin store. Live preview was something he was lucky enough to get in version 1.0. And if you go to the updates page in Craft 1, there was a button that was a one-click update button. Do you remember this? Right? From day one-click update button. Brandon has
I remember
said
that was a big thing.
Nail the big deal.
Yeah.
He said if they couldn't nail the one-click update button, they probably would have bailed on the whole thing. Craft CMS probably wouldn't exist if they couldn't figure out how to do that one-click update.
Which is so interesting now because a
So thankfully,
one-click update on the server is not the way you want to typically go. So fascinating.
no, it's not. But in 2013, that was the best we had.
That was it.
Composer was, I don't even know if Composer existed. If it did, it was like a newborn, you know?
All right, so
in 2014, April, they released 2.0. Okay, here is where you have 3 editions.
Yep.
Personal, Client, and Pro. And they were still using the buildwithcraft.com website.
That's right.
So if this is where Personal, Client, and Pro started in 2.0, yeah, that's correct. Because in 1.0, they had packages. And in 2.0, you had Personal, Client, and Pro. I don't know how they worked it because the plugin store didn't exist yet. They probably had some rudimentary version of their licensing system in place. But yeah, there it is. So that came about in 2014. In 2015, when 2.5 rolled out, it was mostly a UX upgrade. And see, in fact, this last line that I didn't cut off, the entire control panel has been redesigned for better utilization of space on small and extra large screens.
Mm-hmm.
Kind of buried the lead there on 2.5 because that's the most important thing that they did.
Yep.
But on 3.0, they didn't bury the lead. Here you go. The code base has been completely rewritten and refactored to improve performance, maintainability, and extensibility. There it is.
3.0.
2018, April 4th, pivotal moment in Craft's history.
Yeah. And I remember the beta came out in the fall-ish, December-ish of 2018, something like that.
Yeah, in 2017.
2017, yeah.
I remember that too. It was like November, December, and then we all started cranking on our plugins. And plugin developers will remember that 2.x to 3.0 was the most painful plugin update from the plugin developers side. What was great was that the non-plugin developers, the average users, they were just clicked it and everything was like, this works great. But the plugin developers, the architectural changes pre-Composer to post-Composer were so huge. And it wasn't just Composer. It was also that Pixel and Tonic had taken this opportunity to really rewrite and rethink and re-architect major components. Like elements started becoming more of what we know them to be now. They laid a lot of the groundwork for project config and improved draft revisions. Like it was so much stuff happened. Asset volumes became third party, blah, 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 all of it. We went over all of it. This is where it all started to happen in 3.0. By 4.0, it was really a crystallization of the ideas that evolved in 3.0. And by 5, it's just an even more concrete crystallization of that. Now we really are starting to put some real polish down on things that we know are awesome and work really well. And so let me jump back a step and point something out. Well, actually, let me point 2 things out. This is the dumb one. 2.5.2750, 2524, 2266, 2063. When Craft originally started its versioning system,
I remember that.
It had the major version, the minor version, and then the build number.
The build, yeah.
They had an automated system set up. Yep. And so every time they pushed an update for Craft, no matter how large or small it was, it would generate a new build and increment that build number, and that would become the what do you call it in Semver? Your major, minor, and whatever it is, patch, release, whatever it was. They were using the build number. So you have 0.9 point build number, 1.0 point build number, 2.0 point build number, 2.5 point build number, and then they finally moved on. When they used Composer,
yeah,
they were like, hey, that build number thing is switched to Composer. It changed everything. Like it cannot be understated how big of a change it is. I mean, you could, but you'd be like, but why? Like you're creating problems for yourself. And so that's the one thing I want to point out. And then the other thing I wanted to point out was to see the types of things that they're talking about, just broadly speaking, like from a distance, right? So this is a private beta kickoff, straight up. This is 4 or 5 things that they're very proud of with links to how they work. It's 1.0. It makes sense. Here's some things we did. Here's some links to how it works. In 2.0, a little more of that, right? Obviously, there's a formal link to the additions. 2.5, more stuff they're proud of. But by 3.0, and here's what I'm actually trying to draw your attention to, you see references to GitHub tickets.
Right.
So by the time they've got everything on Composer, and they're telling plugin developers your plugin has to run through GitHub in order to show up in the plugin store, they started relying a lot more on GitHub tickets. And so as time went on, you could see more of them relying on GitHub feedback to guide the development of Craft itself.
Was that also when they started having the public repositories?
You about to say something? Yes, everything was public at that point.
Yeah. We have a little bit of a delay again, by the way.
Was when Craft was put. That's fine. Yeah. 3.0, when Composer was introduced, everything went onto GitHub publicly, and some of the plugin developers had thoughts about that of like, well, I don't want my code to be public and blah, blah, blah. And Brandon was basically like, we're doing it. We're making our code public. It's the licensors are there for a reason. There are brief moments of people like grabbing snippets of code, but it never became the problem that some people, including myself, feared it would be.
Right.
So he was right on that one. So 3.0, you start seeing some responses to GitHub. 4.0, you see a lot of responses to GitHub, almost exclusively responses to GitHub. And then 5.0, like this is the world we live in now. It's like if there is a feature added or a bug fixed, there was a GitHub thread about it or more, one or more GitHub threads about it somewhere that at the very least describes the problem, may have been filed from someone in the community, may have been filed by someone at Pixel and Tonic, but everything runs through GitHub now.
Yeah. Oh, man. Fantastic.
And that's it.
That's so cool.
Yeah.
So you still have those demos. I feel like we saw a lot of UI, but let's what do you want to do?
What would you like to see? Yeah, now it's Q&A with live demos here.
Yeah, let's click through some of
these. Look at this guy.
Wow. Let me pull this up full screen. So we do have a little bit of a delay between our voices, Lindsey, but look at that. All right, let's just click through them, and then we can wrap, since I feel like we hit so many screenshots and stuff. That's wild. All right, so that's Craft 1. The old top
Craft 1. We got Craft 2.
Yep. Wow.
One thing that I found interesting as I was going back through this, Craft 1, Craft 2, and Craft 2.5 installed some dummy content for you.
That's right.
So they gave you a channel, a news channel was automatically created, and these 2 entries were automatically created. In fact, I think the homepage here is a single, and then the news is running through the news channel. So those were automatically created as part of the setup process. Oh, check this out. Look
there
at this guy. How fun is that?
Wild. All right, let's
That might be like my favorite little Easter egg.
All right, 2.5. This looks more like
Craft 2.5 was. Yep, it starts to be where things look familiar. They still were doing their dummy content, right? But so under the hood, 2.5 is the same, but visually 2.5 is completely different. Craft 3 is when under the hood caught up with the UX. Craft 3, everything's in Composer. Dev mode's really subtle. We've got utilities. One nice thing we didn't mention before, I really like this line between the line on the sidebar and the line on
Oh
the
yeah.
main area, that it lines up. That was a really nice touch. That wasn't something that they even considered before. That meant nothing to them. And so here we go. I really like it. Just it starts to feel like what we know. It starts to feel. Look at this. Here's the difference between 3 and 4. 3, 4, 3, 4. They're the same. They're the same. The only difference is this guy. I get my little colorful icon, which admittedly is boring because my colors came up boring. But there it is. And I got the same thing on Craft 5, except my colors were even more boring. But that's okay. We'll survive. But between Craft 4 and Craft 5, you're also just looking at very subtle differences. Although in Craft 5, you get your toggleable sidebar. Big fan of that. Well, Craft 4, Craft 3, Craft 2.5, Craft 2.0, and Craft 1.
Well, I mean, when you see it like that, it's easy to see that it hasn't been stagnant both from the UI perspective and under the hood. I mean, even in Craft 5 with the matrix change, the entrification, there's more coming with categories and tags as well. That's super cool, man.
Mm-hmm.
I appreciate you putting all that together. It's a little bit of memory lane happening here for me. Going back, I mean, I think I was telling you off air that I had my 25th wedding anniversary this week, and my wife and I spent a lot of time talking about like 25 years of history and like just all the things that have changed, and just this has been uh over 10 years of history, and
Barely more than 10, yeah.
yeah, like how much we rely on things today that weren't in craft, and how we think that those things are just so normal, like project config or composer, stuff like that. So really, really
Take it all for granted.
fascinating
The
look.
plugin store.
Yeah, plugin
Take it all for
store.
granted.
Yeah, 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 absolutely. So
Yeah.
cool, man. This is going to be the recording of this live stream is going to be in the catalog on CraftQuest, and I think it's going to be a great one to kind of remind people of, and maybe we can add to it at some point, Lindsey, in the future when Craft 6
Yeah.
and in the future comes out, we can add to it and look back at Craft 5. I remember
I love that.
Craft 4, but like Craft 5, like or Craft 3, 2, and 1 seem like distant memories now. So
It is wild how much has changed,
yeah,
and almost entirely for the better. We had certain grievances along the way, and the vast majority of those have been addressed. I mean, the funny thing about solving problems is that then you reach your new problem.
right.
It's the downside of technology, but it's amazing to see the difference between Craft 1 and Craft 5. Like they don't even feel they barely feel related. Like you related, but in a way that like we're related to cavemen. So we'll take it.
Yeah. All right, Lindsey. Thank you for putting this together.
All right, I'm gonna stop sharing my screen here.
Yeah, I'll have links to Lindsey's
So where are you?
Double Secret Agency site, as well as Lindsey. Can we get like a PDF like export of that or something similar? That would be kind of cool to have on the site as well, so people can go
I
through
think
and see
so.
the history.
Yeah,
Yeah,
Keynote does that, right?
yeah. Export as Keynote, and we'll put that up with the recording of the
Yeah, happy
video
to.
to have it that as an artifact of this trip down memory lane. All right, everyone. As a reminder, we are live on CraftQuest on
Yeah, yeah,
Call on
me
the
too.
first and third Thursday of every month, and we appreciate you hanging out with us today. Lindsey, thank you again so much for coming to hang out and do the presentation. I appreciate it.
Thanks, Ryan. It's my pleasure.
All right, take care, everybody. Bye bye.